Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Science Rundown. This is Nicholas Capman with the FDA Group. Before we jump into our discussion for today, just a little bit about the FDA Group. We help life science companies in the areas of quality assurance, regulatory affairs, clinical operations, commissioning, qualification, and validation, as well as pharmacovigilance. We offer three different engagement models, which are consulting, staff augmentation, and full-time employee recruitment. So if you ever find yourself in need, just head over to the fdagroup.com to check us out and get in touch. So today I am speaking with Jeff Brenneman. Hey Jeff, how are you?
I'm good, Nicholas. How are you today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you for joining me today. So before we jump into the topic, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Jeff Brenneman. I'm the Vice President for Global Operations Quality at Alora Pharmaceuticals, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, excellent. So what are we talking about today?
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about how pharmaceutical manufacturers can sustain high-performing teams and robust quality systems while adapting to the evolving FDA inspection, that has been happening throughout this year in 2025. So that'll be kind of the discussion today.
Okay, excellent. So how is the FDA's 2025 transformation reshaping the inspection landscape for pharmaceutical manufacturers?
Yeah, it's a great question, and frankly, I don't know how soon we'll know the full extent of that. As you know, in April, they had a significant reduction in force, and what happened to a lot of the folks, that had a lot of process knowledge is that some retired, some were removed, and then of course, the inspectors that you're seeing out in the field may be slightly more junior now than what they've been in the past, and so. I think with that comes, the little bit of uncertainty as to who you might be getting for your inspector, as well as the timing. Is it going to be the same frequency you've experienced in the past due to some of the changes, or are you going to have a more infrequent inspection process?
Hmm. So there's a lot of questions up in the air, but at this moment in time, where do you land on that uncertainty?
Yeah, I think, manufacturers are going to have to be prepared to either, take advantage of when they do have the inspections. Don't assume they're always going to come around over a year or two, and you have to be ready. You have to have your systems challenged, as polished as possible, your people prepared, because if you miss an opportunity and you don't get the inspection outcome you're hoping for, it could be a while before they come back, right? And so in addition to that, you're going to have the inspectors that, may not have the level of discretion you've seen in the past. If you have a senior inspector, there's little things that they know that don't impact public safety or they're not, large compliance issues. So they may be a discussion item. They may be something they pull your attention to, but they don't end up in your report, right? They don't end up as an observation. And what I've seen so far this year is that has changed a little bit. So you have some junior inspectors that, everything is becoming an observation, whether it's minor, major, critical. And so with that, you have to respond appropriately, right? If you're going to get an inspection, maybe you used to have a couple of 483s and now you're ending up with four, five, six,
Hmm.
there's going to be a change in how you respond, right? Because it's going to seem more serious than it might actually be. So those are going to be some of the changes that I think you're going to start to see across a lot of the pharmaceutical inspections.
So it sounds like there's not a whole lot you can do to prepare for that other than being ready. But I guess you're just trying to explain to our audience that they should be ready for that and not be shocked or surprised when that presents itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, understanding who you're going to get as an inspector and what they're going to be focused on is important on how you prepare, right? Because if they show up, they're going to be more around, are you meeting compliance expectations in a black and white format? Are you doing it or are you not doing it? That's going to be the focus. While the FDA does focus a lot on risk assessment, as well as, a lot of the guidance documents that we are provided, risk assessment is for a lot of times gray areas, right? So if you're operating in a gray space where there's not a clear regulation or requirement, you develop a risk assessment to understand with data and facts how to move forward. And the change here with how the inspection may occur is that level of thinking may not be fully understood because you're going to get someone who's an inspector that may not have the background that you're used to getting. Someone that had many years of pharmaceutical experience before, you might now be getting someone from food or someone from medical device or someone else. And then when they come in and don't have that same level of understanding, if they see something that you've done, like a risk assessment, to try to come up with a rational approach to a gray space, decision, they're going to have a lot of questions and challenges for that, right?
Yeah.
Versus, black and white decisions where you're either doing it or you're not.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna take back my previous comment because I said I don't know there's a lot more you can do rather than be ready. So why don't I remove that statement and ask you instead, what are some of the, critical cultural operational shifts that pharmaceutical companies can do to kind of stay ahead of some of these changes that you've talked about?
Yeah, definitely. You have to make sure that your people are prepared and inspection ready. But I think that's always been a norm in the industry, right? That's been something that most companies try to aspire to. But some of the shifts are you're going to have to make sure that everything is documented, and clear to someone outside your organization, right? A lot of times we get stuck in our own little bubble within our company, and we write with our own perspective that we're assuming everybody in the organization we already know will understand, right? You have your acronyms, you have your specific topics, you go right into, let's say, a deviation or an investigation, and you're already talking about, what happened, and you didn't explain anything about the product itself, the background of how it deviated from the beginning,
Mm,
right? So it's important to craft not only your procedures and your documents, your risk assessments, but like your investigations, which are always going to be a focus from the FDA. Craft them in a way that someone from the outside can understand, right?
mm,
Because if they come in and have no idea what you're talking about, it's going to immediately raise flags and they're going to just dig into it, right? But if you explain it in layman's terms at the beginning, this product had this event, it happened on this day on this piece of equipment, and you explain it, lay it out in very, very simple terms, and then get further down the line into more details. That will make you more successful when you're dealing with someone that may not have the level of experience you're used to.
mhm. Well, it sounds like essentially you're saying that the quality organization has to perform at a higher level than maybe it, did 5 years ago because of these changes. So, what would you say kind of distinguishes the current required state versus what we were used to just only 5 years ago?
Right. Well, obviously the changes, in the inspection landscape is one. But as everyone knows, we've been, as our industry has been facing a lot of pricing and competitive pressure from foreign manufacturers, right? And so that puts a lot of cost reduction um, initiatives on the table. And
Mm,
so you may have fewer staff members to work with. You may have fewer tools available to you. You don't have a big bucket of money sitting over in the corner, which maybe we were used to having in the past, depending on the size of your company. So we have to be able to be more nimble and agile, decisive, and be able to document and our philosophies and our rationales in a way that's clear for everybody involved, right? And so I think that's been the every year that change becomes more pronounced because as that competitive pressure from foreign manufacturers, we're seeing more layoffs this year in the pharma industry than in previous years, right? That there continues to be that culture of do more with less.
mm,
So that's not going to change, right? That's not going to change for us. We have to just adapt to it, and we have to learn how to be successful in that environment by implementing certain practices like Lean Six Sigma or process excellence to try to make sure you have very simple yet compliant practices that you can follow and you get the job done with fewer people.
yeah. And it sounds like, on top of everything, you really need a robust quality system, which we've been saying for years and
Right.
decades, but the definition of what does a robust quality system look like, I think has changed and evolved. So, what would you say that looks like in 2025 specifically, and how should manufacturers audit their current systems against that vision?
Yeah, so a robust system, by my own definition, would be something that's simple, efficient, and compliant, right? And you can't have that when you have a lot of complexity in your systems and the way you developed it. Now, obviously, a lot of people, when they think quality systems, are going to immediately think about some type of electronic system that manages your change controls and your
Hmm.
investigations and your complaints. And that's important, right? Obviously, there's a lot of advantages to have an electronic system. But a lot of the electronic systems that exist out there, especially if you're using them out of the box, are not necessarily prepared to fit exactly what you're used to. So it's important that you craft the procedures that govern those processes in a smart way. And what I've seen a lot with systems that aren't robust is you have procedures that disagree with themselves. You have procedures that disagree with other procedures. And if you follow this one, you deviate from that one, right? Or you have lack of clarity in roles and responsibilities. It's not specific enough. Maybe you give training for a procedure to the entire site because you think they all need to know it, when in fact only maybe 10 people need to understand and follow it. So
Mm.
when you have lack of clarity in your procedures, you have unnecessary training that's going out to everybody, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're going to
Mm.
have more deviations, more rework. You're going to have, it's going to look like you're less compliant because the more training you assign, the harder it's going to be to get it done on time, or you're going to miss it, right? So you have to be very precise. And when you craft your procedures, they need to interact with each other. They need to be simple and efficient, and they need to be very clear on who's supposed to do what. So you can then target training that's specific to either that department, that process, or whatever. And then all your procedures have to interlock. They have to hand off from one to the other in a very clear process, right? So to me, just crafting your procedures is probably the most important part of a robust quality system, more so than whatever electronic system you choose, because you're going to have a, electronic system regardless. That's the tool, but you still have to have your policies and your procedures which govern how you manage that tool and how you manage issues within the facility.
Yeah. So, what we're talking about, it sounds like a problem, which, a lot of us understand is a synonym for opportunity. And one of the other things we also know is there's a difference between compliance and quality. So with these new efforts and a push to be compliant with some of these changes that we've discussed, I'm imagining that there might be an opportunity where we can utilize some of these tactics and strategies to enhance quality and take advantage of some of these changes in order to drive value within the organization. So, could you comment on that?
Absolutely. Compliance is a lot of times can just be a checklist. It's like, did you do this? Yes. Did you do that? No. Whereas quality, obviously, there's levels of success and how you can meet quality, not only for your product, but for your systems and everything else, right? So with some of the changes, the expectations that you're going to have with the compliance requirements, right? It's important to think how those compliance requirements express themselves within your organization, how they impact the quality of your product, how they impact the quality of your systems, and tailoring something that's a solution that can handle more than one of those requirements, right? So, if you're focused on data integrity and you have your data integrity checklist and you want to go through and check it all off and make sure you have the right things set up for that, you also need to make sure that that is the important aspect is data integrity provides the backbone for your product quality, right?
Mm.
And that's the reason it's there. It's not just a checklist exercise. So how does that relate to your product quality? And then can you design a process that takes the important pieces from there and expresses themselves into your process and your product, right? Because we don't have time to just have a bunch of checklist procedures and then have to also manage our specifications and our product APRs and everything else. Like we got enough going on as it is, so don't make it complicated. Try to unify
Mm.
those things as much as possible. And maybe you do need a checklist once in a while to make sure your people are following, their processes.
Mm.
But you have to think beyond check the box thinking. You have to have critical
Mm.
thinking. You have to have solution oriented thinking that goes into translating those requirements into the quality of your product. Because that's, again, ultimately patient safety and patient success is our focus.
Yeah. What I heard while you were talking is that in order to, be proactive as it pertains to FDA readiness now and moving beyond checklist compliance is a word intentionality, being intentional
Yeah, right.
about taking some of these changes, making sure that you're compliant and improving overall quality. I want to dive a little bit into data integrity and digital quality management systems and how those play in meeting some of these updated FDA expectations. Could you add some value in terms of that?
Sure, absolutely. So obviously some of the basics for the people that may not know is, with data integrity, the requirements that the FDA has set out is that you have good electronic systems or your paper systems that follow those principles, Alcoa and all the other parts of the data integrity, practice that's required. But are you doing the things necessary to show that, to demonstrate that your systems maintain that data integrity readiness, right? Those are things like audit trail reviews. Is your audit trail turned on? Do the right people have the roles and access to your systems? Do you have a good backup and restore program, right? Basically, for the ISPE GAMP 5, good automated manufacturing practices guidance is going to help with, kind of create that process for you. But the FDA is going to they're expecting even some basic things that I've seen recently, observations where you just didn't put a certain number on a report. Whereas you might have 10 other identifiers, but just that one number wasn't there. So now it's an observation, right? So again, it's coming down to these minor details, and making sure that you have as much robustness in your process, your reporting, and your data integrity so that you're linking everything together in a good way. And then you have to challenge it on a routine basis, whether it's quarterly, annually, whether you bring someone in from the outside or whether you have your own people that go around and check, are your systems meeting the requirements of data integrity? Because the FDA will ask for that. They're going to want to see, show me, log into your system and show me what, who has access to it right now. Show me your audit trail. Can you change data? Can you alter and delete data? Try to delete that for me, right? Those are things that the FDA will ask you to do, and it's a very basic challenge to a complicated system. So we have to be ready for that.
Hmm. Great point. So you did a good job of explaining what needs to happen. Now actually making it happen is kind of the next step, right? So,
Yeah.
what are some of the biggest challenges that kind of leadership um, face in terms of engagement and accountability in quality roles?
Right. Yeah, it's difficult in certain aspects, in the pharma industry, because you have people that get into the business that may not always think outside their building, right? They grew up within the organization. They know the organization's practices, but they don't have regulatory intelligence. They don't think about what's going on outside, what's going on in the industry. And I think where it comes to engagement is you have to also have a culture where if someone raises a concern or expresses a viewpoint, they need to feel like they've been heard, like they have value, right? Because if they don't, if it's just, paved right over and you move on with business as usual, right? That person's eventually going to start to feel like, why am I even here? This doesn't
Mm,
even matter anymore because I'm not providing any useful, information to the company. So the company and the leadership in the company have a responsibility to make sure there's good escalation processes, that people feel heard. And if they do have a concern, you either say, yes, that's an accurate concern and we take action, or no, that's not really a concern, and here's why. We have it covered, and it's covered from this aspect, right? So you have to make sure that your workforce feels that engagement within the organization so that they stay motivated and high performing. Because if they
mm,
don't, they're gonna their morale is gonna start to slip. But on the opposite side, the accountability is important, right? Not only engagement, which is a responsibility of leadership to make sure it happens, but accountability is a responsibility of the people in their roles, right? So how are they making decisions, right? Do they understand their procedures, and do they understand the CFR and the guidance that exists out there? Because if they're making decisions that are hurting the company, taking longer to get something done, increasing cost, things like that you don't really need to meet compliance, they might be overboard a little bit. Then what's the accountability there for people in the quality department to make sure that you remain agile as an organization, right? So I think it's important that quality professionals have to evolve. They can't just think about quality. They have to think about operations and efficiency and cost and these other aspects, because every decision you make in quality is going to have an impact on the business in some way. So you just need to know what that is. And obviously, if it's a compliance concern that has to happen, then it's going to happen regardless of the cost. but you still there's smaller decisions like how you write a report or who you train or things like that that can have a cost impact that quality needs to be aware of. You can't just sit back and say everybody has to train on this or everybody has to do this because that's
It's
really
not
not a strategic
intentional.
way of thinking. It's not
Yeah,
intentional. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's the balance between engagement and accountability.
yeah. I want to stay on this theme of leadership. How can leaders build a culture where quality isn't siloed or reactive, but it's embedded in a cross-functional behavior?
Absolutely. It's important that the top leadership understand that, first off, and then that they sponsor and build programs that enhance the quality culture. And it's more than just training. It's more than just having a GMP training once a year, right? It's part of it's your organizational structure. How is quality set up within the organization? Do you have counterparts for every major part of the business, right? And are those counterparts embedded within the organizations that they belong with? To create a solid working relationship because quality I know in the past sometimes quality was thought of as the police, but we're not police, we're partners, right? We have
Hmm.
to make sure that the business is sustainable not only from a compliance and safety aspect but from profitability. Those two go hand in hand. You could be compliant all day long, but if you're not making money as a company, then no one has a job, and then vice versa. You can't make money and not and ignore the rules and the requirements, so both of them have to be taken into account. So, that's the important part of, creating a quality culture is making sure that your leaders understand this and then drive that down. So when you create a good organizational chart and you have your counterparts set up in quality to be partners in a lot of the major functions of the organization, that's the first step. The other part is having that critical thinking where people are aware of the requirements, but also aware of what their decisions will do to the company, depending on how they react to situations.
Hmm.
And then the last one that I think is very important is having a career development program that helps the individual person within your organization advance their career, because if you do it right, you can tie that to the needs in the business. And what will happen is if you have someone that, say, in operations, they've been there 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, I want to work in quality, or I want to work in the lab, or I want to work in regulatory. Find a way to get them there, right? Find them
Hmm.
a way to move over, because the more cross-functional people have in their experience, the better perspectives they're going to have on how they could perform in the business and what the aspects are that they have to consider for other aspects, right? If you've only ever been, in quality for 20, 25 years, right, you're going to think a certain way, you're going to perceive things a certain way. But if you've had some experience in multiple departments, you're now thinking more of how is a business going to be successful but still succeed in the regulatory landscape, right? So I think the quality culture has to address each of those aspects. How the organization's set up, a good support top down to make sure that people understand how to use critical thinking and think of how they're making decisions. And like you said, be intentional. And then also have a good career development program that pairs people's desires to explore and expand their career with the needs of the company and where you might benefit by having people move around within the organization to provide a better perception of how to get the job done, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, there's lots of regulatory pressure, there's resource constraints, there's constant change. And I think you alluded to some of this in your previous answer, but what are some strategies that can help sustain performance while dealing with all of this?
Right. Well, the big strategy, I'm a firm believer in one-on-ones, right? That it's important to have one-on-one meetings with all your leaders, and the leaders have to have them with their people, right? That's the number one key to engagement and performance, because in a one-on-one, people feel like they can, you want them to feel comfortable enough to bring you issues where they may not feel comfortable in a big group meeting, right? And as
Mhm.
well, you can give feedback and you can give expectations to that person. And the more often you have these meetings in an honest and direct fashion, the more productive and engaged the people are going to be, right? So if you make sure that your leadership is conducting those on a regular basis, doing them in a right way, that's going to elevate the performance of your team, to try to sustain, the profitability of the company and the regulatory compliance as well, because people understand how they're supposed to get the job done. So performance management techniques don't need to be complicated. They can be very simple, and it comes down to just clear communication, being direct, and telling someone when they're falling short or whether they're exceeding. If you tell everyone they're doing a great job, nothing ever changes. You're not going to have a high performing team. You have to tell the people that aren't doing a great job that they aren't, right? So I think that's important as part of the performance management process, is having one-on-ones to provide that clear feedback, to promote engagement, and then tying that together with career development and other things that you can say, hey, listen, I want to help you in your career, but if you're going to get to here, you have to improve on these three things. Right. And
Yeah.
so that helps to build that level of engagement and productivity within your organization.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is the difference between being nice and being kind. Being nice is you're doing a great job whether they are or not. Being kind is
Yep.
really caring about their development and being radically candid if they're not meeting the bar because you want what's best for them, whether it's to make the correct changes in order to grow within their role or maybe find something that's a better fit. In each case, it's a win-win. Well, I think you've done a
Absolutely.
really good job, Jeff, in terms of talking about how pharmaceutical manufacturers can sustain high-performing teams and robust quality systems while adapting to, the evolving FDA inspections and the agency's transformation in 2025. Before we close, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, I'd like to say that, everyone in the pharmaceutical industry has an important role, right? There's not one department that's more important than another. But being a leader in the quality department, I would leave by saying that, quality has a more important role than ever, right? We are the last thing between, patient safety and companies having massive recalls or having compliance issues, right? So we have to take our roles seriously, but we also have to evolve, like we've talked about previously here, that you have to think critically and think about cost and efficiency as well as your compliance aspects, right? Because that's where we're at now. That's the landscape has changed enough that we have to be considering those things and can't just keep the quality hat on all the time. You have to now think of how is operations going to be impacted by this, and how is, customer service going to be impacted by this? What's it going to do to sales, right? And then start making decisions that are the right decisions for safety and compliance, but also keep in mind, how do you stay nimble? How do you stay efficient so that our companies, can still be competitive on the world market?
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Jeff, thank you so much for your insight. This has been really valuable. And for everybody listening, as always, if you find conversations like this valuable, please share it with a colleague or your professional network. If you have not already, subscribe to get updates of new episodes at thefdagroup.com/podcast. And follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn. If you would like to connect about project or resource needs, head over to thefdagroup.com to get in touch, or feel free to connect with me personally on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you all next time.